Do you know that feeling when something seems too big to be true, but at the same time too frightening to be just fantasy? That's exactly what happens when you start digging deep into the story of Billy the Kid. Because you see, this guy became such a monumental legend in the American Wild West that even today we're left wondering, wait a minute, did this madman really exist? Or was it all just a grand invention to sell newspapers and scare children? The truth? Well, the truth is much stranger and more disturbing than anything Hollywood has ever had the courage to put on screen. And I'm going to tell you everything, down to the smallest details, because this story deserves to be told properly, without filters, without cheap romanticization. Billy the Kid wasn't just an outlaw. He was a phenomenon, a walking mystery, and possibly the greatest enigma of the Wild West. Let's start with the basics, because even the basics about Billy are controversial. His real name? Not even that we know for certain. The most accepted version says he was born as Henry McCarty, probably in New York, sometime between 1859 and 1861. Notice the problem? We don't even know exactly when this guy was born. There are documents pointing to 1859, others to 1860, and some even swear he was born in 1861. How can one of the most famous criminals in America have a birth certificate that's practically a gamble? And look, that's no accident. Because Billy the Kid lived in a time when you could simply disappear and reappear with another name, another story, an entirely new life. The American West in the second half of the 19th century was like a black hole of identities. You crossed the border, moved to another state, and boom, you were someone else. No digital documents, no cameras on every corner, no internet to track you. It was absolute freedom and complete anonymity at the same time. So just imagine the scene. A skinny teenager, angel-faced, the kind of kid you'd see on the street and think was heading to school. But this boy had something unsettling in his eyes. Witnesses at the time described Billy's gaze as disturbing, almost hypnotic. They said he could smile at you while his hands were already on his revolver. And that's the detail many people forget when they romanticize his story. Billy the Kid was truly dangerous, not some cowboy movie game. His mother, Catherine McCarty, was Irish and tried to give the boy a decent life. She married a man named William Antrim when Billy was still a child, and the family moved to New Mexico. But that's when things got really interesting. Catherine died of tuberculosis when Billy was only 14 or 15 years old. And you already know what happens when a teenager is orphaned in the Wild West, right? There was no social worker, no child protection council, nothing. It was fend for yourself or die. His stepfather, William Antrim, according to reports, didn't care about the boy at all. So Billy began wandering, taking odd jobs, getting into trouble. And here's a detail many people don't know. Billy the Kid's first recorded crime wasn't some epic murder out of a Western film. No, he stole butter and clothes from a Chinese laundry. That's right, butter. The legendary Billy the Kid began his career by stealing grocery items, but then things escalated quickly. Because Billy had a natural talent for two things, making dangerous friends and getting into trouble. And when I say talent, I mean real talent. He had a strange charisma, you know. That kind of person you know is bad news, but you still want to be around them. People at the time said Billy was funny, that he played guitar, danced well, and was popular with women. How could a killer be so beloved? And look, this is one of the great mysteries about Billy the Kid that no one can quite solve. Because according to official reports, this guy killed at least 8 people. 8. But the legend says it was 21, one for each year of his life. Only when you start really investigating, counting the confirmed bodies, things don't add up. There are murders attributed to him without any concrete evidence. There are deaths he clearly didn't commit, but that still became part of the myth. And then there are cases where we simply don't know if it was him or not, because there was no forensic science, no serious investigation. Everything was based on rumors and testimony from people who were often drunk or just wanted to see chaos unfold. The crucial moment in Billy the Kid's life happened during the Lincoln County War, and man, if you thought this story was already crazy, buckle up because it's about to get way worse. In 1878, New Mexico was on fire. There were 2 main factions fighting for control of trade in the region. On one side, Lawrence Murphy and James Dolan, who controlled the House, a company that practically had a monopoly on everything. On the other side, John Tunstall, a wealthy Englishman who wanted to break that monopoly, and Alexander McSween, a lawyer who allied with him. Billy worked for Tunstall, and by all accounts he really liked his boss. Tunstall treated his employees well, paid fairly, and was just. And then the unthinkable happened. On February 18, 1878, men connected to Murphy and Dolan ambushed Tunstall and shot him dead. They gunned him down right in front of Billy and other workers. And here, according to legend, the true Billy the Kid was born, the ruthless avenger. Because Billy couldn't stomach it, he joined the Regulators, a group formed to avenge Tunstall, and that's when the real bloodbath began. The Regulators hunted down and executed several of the men involved in Tunstall's death. And Billy? Billy was on the front line with smoking revolvers, with that cold smile people said he had. It was during this period that the skinny kid turned into an efficient killing machine. The Lincoln County War was a slaughter. There were shootouts in broad daylight, ambushes, summary executions, and the most disturbing part, the authorities did nothing. In fact, many times the authorities themselves were involved on one side or the other. The sheriff, the deputies, the judges, everyone had picked a team. Justice in the Wild West was a cruel joke, and Billy the Kid understood that very early on. One of the most famous events of this war was the 5-day shootout in Lincoln. Billy and other Regulators barricaded themselves inside McSween's house, while Murphy and Dolan's forces surrounded the place. For 5 full days, there was constant gunfire. Women and children were trapped inside the house. The tension was unbearable. And in the end, when the house caught fire, McSween was killed while trying to surrender. Billy escaped by jumping out a back window while firing with both hands, fleeing in a mad dash through the darkness. Witnesses said they saw him laughing as he ran, as if the whole thing were just a big game. And here's where the wildest speculations about Billy the Kid begin. Because after the Lincoln County War, the boy became a living legend. Newspapers started publishing stories about him, each more absurd than the last. They said he could shoot with perfect accuracy with both hands at once. They said he had killed his first man at 12. They said he was practically immortal, that he had escaped 20 different ambushes. And the worst part? Billy himself made no effort to deny these stories. On the contrary, he seemed to enjoy the fame. But here's where the story gets really strange. Because in the midst of all this violence, Billy wasn't just a bloodthirsty killer. He was complicated. He had friends among the poor Mexicans in the region, and many of them adored him. They said Billy spoke fluent Spanish, that he helped needy families, that he never stole from the poor. He stole cattle from wealthy ranchers and sold it cheaply to small landowners. He was like a psychopathic Robin Hood, if that makes any sense. And the women? Man, the stories about Billy and women are out of this world. They said he had a different fling in every town, that he was charming, gallant, that he could dance better than any cowboy in the territory. There are even reports that he attended Mexican dances and was always the center of attention. How did a man with a price on his head find time for a social life? How was he not afraid to show up in public? And here lies one of the biggest controversies. Was Billy the Kid really the monster the newspapers portrayed him to be? Or was he turned into a scapegoat for all the crimes happening in the region? Because look, when you read the reports carefully, you realize a lot of things don't add up. There are murders attributed to Billy that happened in places where he wasn't even present. There are witnesses who swore they saw him commit crimes, but who were later found to have reasons to lie. And there's the bizarre fact that Billy the Kid became more famous after his death than while he was alive. But then comes the final chapter of this insane saga, and this is where things get so confusing that even today, historians argue about what really happened. In 1880, Pat Garrett was elected sheriff of Lincoln County with a clear mission: capture or kill Billy the Kid. And here's the disturbing detail everyone forgets. Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid were friends. They played cards together, drank together, they were truly close. And now, suddenly, one was hunting the other. Garrett pursued Billy relentlessly. In December 1880, he managed to capture Billy the Kid and some other gang members in Stinking Springs. Billy was taken to trial, sentenced to death by hanging. But here's where Billy's legend comes alive. While awaiting execution, handcuffed and constantly watched, Billy managed to kill his 2 guards and escape. He was shackled, the guards were armed, and still Billy killed both and rode away on horseback. How? To this day, no one can really explain it. It's like an action movie scene that seems impossible in real life, but it happened. This escape left Pat Garrett completely humiliated. The sheriff had promised to end Billy the Kid, and now the boy had slipped right under his nose. Garrett became obsessed, and then we reached the night of July 14th, 1881, the night that would change everything. Garrett had received word that Billy was hiding in Pete Maxwell's house in Fort Sumner. In the official version, Garrett entered the house in the middle of the night, was talking with Pete Maxwell in his room when Billy showed up. Billy didn't see Garrett in the dark, asked, "¿Quién es?" in Spanish, and Garrett fired twice, killing Billy the Kid instantly. The most famous outlaw of the American West died at 21, with a bullet to the heart. End of story, right? Wrong, very wrong. Because since that night in July 1881, conspiracy theories have never stopped emerging. First, the body. Billy was buried the next day, in a funeral that was way too quick with no proper autopsy. People who saw the body said it was Billy, but it was dark. The face was disfigured by the shot. How could they be sure? Second, Pat Garrett got rich after this. He wrote a book about Billy the Kid that sold a lot. He gained fame, got elected to several positions. Very convenient, don't you think? A failed sheriff suddenly becomes a national hero for killing his old friend. Third, and this is where it gets really crazy, men started appearing claiming to be Billy the Kid. Not one, not two, but dozens over the years. The most famous was Brushy Bill Roberts, who in 1950, at 90 years old, came forward saying he was the real Billy the Kid, that Pat Garrett had killed another man that night, and that Billy had lived quietly in Texas for decades. Brushy Bill knew details about Billy's life that few people knew. He had scars in the right places. He knew things about the Lincoln County War that weren't in books. How? Obviously, DNA tests could solve this, right? Wrong again. Because when they tried to exhume Billy the Kid's body to do the test, they discovered the grave was empty. Either someone stole the body, or there was never a body there, or something very strange happened. To this day, no one knows. And there's more. There is only one confirmed photo of Billy the Kid, that famous tintype where he appears with a hat and a rifle. But analyzing the photo with modern technology, experts noticed strange things. The shadow doesn't match properly. The position of the weapons suggests the image might have been reversed, and some people swear it's not Billy in the photo, but someone else entirely. How can the only verified image of one of America's most famous criminals be questionable? So we return to the original question. Was Billy the Kid real or legend? The honest answer: he was both. There was a boy named Henry McCarty who got involved in the Lincoln County War, who killed people, who lived as an outlaw. That's documented fact. But the legend of Billy the Kid, the young man who killed 21 men, who was invincible, who laughed in the face of death, who could shoot with both hands while galloping at full speed, that was the creation of the sensationalist newspapers of the time, which needed to sell copies and discovered that stories about dangerous cowboys sold very well. Billy the Kid became larger than life because America needed an anti-hero. The country was going through a brutal transformation, leaving behind the wild frontier to become a modern nation. And in the midst of this transition, people wanted stories of men who lived free, who didn't follow rules, who made their own laws. Billy represented everything society was losing: absolute freedom, danger, adventure. But at the same time, he represented the chaos that needed to be controlled. That's why Pat Garrett had to kill him. It wasn't just about capturing a criminal. It was about proving that the law was winning, that civilization was taking over the Wild West. The death of Billy the Kid was symbolic. It was the moment when America said, "The era of outlaws is over. Now it's the era of order." And yet, more than 140 years later, we're still here talking about him. Still asking ourselves if he really died that night. Still trying to separate the man from the myth, because Billy the Kid touched something deep in the American psyche. He was the last breath of an era where you could simply take a horse and disappear into the horizon, where your life was yours and no one else's, where you made your own rules. The truth about Billy the Kid is probably somewhere between the extremes. He wasn't the murderous demon that some newspapers portrayed, but he also wasn't the romantic Robin Hood that others wanted him to be. He was a boy who was orphaned very early, thrown into a violent world without protection, who learned to survive the only way he could. He made terrible choices, killed people who didn't deserve to die, caused suffering, but he was also a product of his time, a time where violence was currency and justice belonged to whoever shot faster. And maybe that's why Billy the Kid never really died. It doesn't matter if Pat Garrett killed the right man that night in Fort Sumner. It doesn't matter if there are 20 photos of him or none. It doesn't matter if he killed 8 people or 21. What matters is that Billy the Kid became immortal the very moment his story began to be told. He became a legend because we need legends. We need to believe that there are people who live completely free, even if that freedom comes with a terrible price. The story of Billy the Kid is the story of America itself. Violent, contradictory, exaggerated, fascinating, and impossible to fully understand. It's a story where facts mix with fiction so completely that separating one from the other becomes impossible. And maybe that's exactly how it should be, because sometimes legend is more important than truth, and myth reveals things about us that facts alone never could. So was Billy the Kid real? Yes. Was Billy the Kid a legend? Also yes. And that duality, that impossibility of fitting him into a simple box, is exactly what makes his story so powerful, so enduring, so absolutely fascinating more than a century later. He was the ghost of the Old West, and ghosts never truly die. They just keep haunting, generation after generation, reminding us of a time when anything was possible, for better and for worse. And if you've made it this far on this wild journey through the Old West, if you've been intrigued by the mysteries of Billy the Kid, by the contradictions of this story that defies any simple explanation, then do this. Subscribe to the channel, because there's so much more story to tell, so much more mystery to unravel, so much more legend to investigate. And who knows, maybe next time we'll discover if that empty grave in Fort Sumner holds secrets even more disturbing than we imagine.